important decision in that school that doesn't involve teacher voice. There are committees, majority of whom are teachers, that decide things like stipends, that do the hiring in the school, that design the professional development. Every important function in that school has a teacher committee, a teacher majority committee, which makes the decisions. It has a due process system, which, because charter school law in New York State does not include teachers in the tenure system, it is not a system of tenure. What it is a system in which from day one entering the school, teachers have a just cause standard for discipline and for dismissal. And in the case of issues where a teacher believes that they're being unjustly disciplined or unjustly dismissed, they have the ability to go to an independent arbitrator to hear their case. Then there are two agreements that are within the New York City public school system. Two groups of very innovative educators who came to the union and asked us for our assistance. And what we did was we developed a memorandums of agreement which modified the existing collective bargaining agreement between the DOE and us to allow these schools to do real innovation. And I want to say here parenthetically that one of the original reasons for establishing charter schools, when Al Shanker was one of their first and strongest advocates, was to do educational innovation, which then could be shared among all public schools. And I think, unfortunately, today a lot of that has been lost. But here are two very interesting cases of doing that sort of innovation, even within the district. Brooklyn Generations is a school that has completely rethought the use of time. And so we set up an agreement which allows them, the teachers still teach the same number of days, they teach the same number of hours, but they can completely reconfigure the school calendar. And in that process, they give students a much longer school day and a much longer school year. It is, some teachers will be working through the summer, but have a longer December or a longer March off. All of that is possible simply reconfiguring, getting out of the traditional ways in which we think of school day and school year, reconfiguring it in new ways. The New American Academy is also a very interesting model of experimentation. It has a professional career ladder that goes from apprentice all the way to master teacher. And there are additional pay for people who reach master teacher and associate teacher. The school is organized so that there are teams of 4 teachers, one of whom is the master teacher who leads the team. And they work with classes of 60 students. So the whole idea of the way that we have traditionally thought of education as something which is delivered in a classroom with one teacher and a bunch of students is completely rethought. The beginning of each school day begins with an hour and a half of dedicated time for that team to meet, to plan out their day, to analyze what happened in the previous day, to discuss what's happening with their students. One of the things that's very interesting about American education, when you look at it in an international context, is that although teachers in Japan work a much longer day and year than Americans, they actually spend less time in the classroom because there's an understanding that teachers need that time for professional development, for work together. And so New American Academy is this marvelous, extraordinarily innovative school that has actually been able to develop inside of a public school system, given that side agreement that we reached. So I want to say to you today that when you read Joel Klein in Atlantic magazine, he will say that collaboration is the elixir of the status quo crowd. But in fact, collaboration is a different model for how you do school change. And what is the great irony of this is that in the same article, he talks about how wonderful these innovative experiments are at Brooklyn Generations and New American Academy, in either apparent ignorance or unwillingness to talk about how they came out of work with the union, and the union was the main force in moving them forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was terrific.
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
Hello. I guess I'm next. Hello, I'm Lyle Kurtman from Future Management Systems. We're a consulting firm that's worked with about 700 organizations over 30 years. We also have worked with 300 school districts and thousands of schools. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But one, I have a rare treat here to be, get to admit something I never do in Massachusetts, because I live in Massachusetts, that I actually am from New York. Because I don't try to admit that here because everybody assumes that I was a Yankee fan. I am a Red Sox fan, but I did get to debate a little bit with Seth. And we kind of looked at the possibilities of wondering what it would be like if we could take the New York taxis drivers and put them in Massachusetts roadways. That'd be a wonderful picture of what that would be like. We'd like to see how that would work. It's great to be part of this panel, to be able to talk about education. Yesterday I was just with 350 principals in Massachusetts talking about many of the issues that we're talking about today. Actually, the title of my presentation is We're in a World of Urgency and Accountability. How do we do the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law? So it's actually was talking about that. What I'm trying to do in our work is to, we've worked with so many leaders, superintendents, one of them that's here in this panel, principals, and coached them and worked on leadership. We've also done that in the private sector, and actually I just completed a book for Pearson Publishing called The Missing Piece of the Education Reform Puzzle, Leadership in Teams. Because I believe that all the models of success that we see in both the public and the private sector, because I work in the corporate world, are when we see this more collaborative leadership. The collaborative leadership can be strong, and at times does need to be top-down, so we can maybe debate this a little bit. There are times for strong leadership, but it can be about setting up a culture for teams and leadership. One thing that I have that's been helpful for me in the education world, I do not come from the education world because I've been in it so long. I have the credibility to work with so many superintendents and principals. We also do searches for leaders in education, is that I actually have data to support this, and not just have a conversation. We do not have time for me to present this data. But what I've been able to do is take some leadership inventories that are used in healthcare, private sector, even in the government, do some work with the government. The Myers-Briggs inventory that many people have heard of, the DISC inventory, which is about leadership behaviors, and a values inventory about people's values. And I've created a database of about 600 leaders across the country. And there's some startling findings that I have from this, and that's what I'm writing about and speaking about, is that we think in this world of accountability, reliability, and pressure, and teacher evaluation, all the things that we need to do to tighten up education, that the leaders are really the right leaders. What I've been able to show through the data is we're actually putting in the wrong leaders consistently throughout education. What we are putting in as the primary characteristic and behavior of leaders in education from my database are people who will comply with laws and will slow down change. Those are the primary leaders that we're putting in. That's the highest category of all my data. The people who will have some sense of urgency about driving change and build a collaborative environment are the lowest numbers. Now here's the startling part of the data. When I present this to the core educational people, the people who are successful in getting test scores to go up are the right leaders. They're in the minority. They're the people who are first on this characteristic called influencing. They know how to build teams. They know how to work collaboratively with unions, with all these different groups. They know how to motivate rather than be punitive. These are the leaders that get the best results on test scores. The lowest compliance people get the highest results. The higher compliance people get the lowest results. But because we're in such a world of accountability and driving test scores, the people that emerge into the leadership roles are the people who will not get the results. So the data is consistent every single time, whether I'm in Texas or whether I'm Massachusetts or New York or DC or anything. The leaders that get the results are low compliance, they're low steadiness, which means they move quickly. Now, they don't talk as fast as Seth, but they move quickly. And they build teams, but they have some strength to make tough decisions. That's the profile, and I just wrote an article for Harvard Ed School about this that was just on their website, that I have the data to prove this all around the country. Here's the remarkable, serious problem. In the urban districts especially, we're putting in top-down leaders, as Leo was talking about. They are dominant leaders. They're supposed to change education quickly. Each of these leaders, when they go in, and I have the data from some of these districts like Philadelphia, the people who are steadiness compliance people, who are playing it safe, they become weaker and less leaders. They withdraw. They have less sense of urgency every time they put a dominant person in. So the reason these dominant people do not work is when they come in and do top-down change, they actually decrease sense of urgency and they decrease results. So they come in and you read if you Google top-down leadership and superintendents, you will see a remarkable story. You will see article after article. You shall read all the people that have come into these districts, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Atlanta, all these places, top-down leaders, the same words. I can prove it and match it to our profiles. That come in, drive change, they get some short-term results. Then they get fired or they resign, and then they blame the district and they blame the teachers and the principals. If you look at the book, Good to Great, which is a great book around leadership, it is sustainability of leadership over time that creates results. These leaders are never around because they lose their positions. And the same article, look at the articles, the same words described in each community that they go into. Now I understand they're trying to get urgency, and I understand the school boards are trying to do this. It can't work. It's never worked, and there's no data. So what we need are collaborative type leaders who are strong. There is a profile, and I believe we can find those people. We do searches, so I can identify who those leaders are earlier in their career. The sad story about this is we just got some new data that we're going to pursue. We've been looking at dropout rates of kids, and we've used these same profiles. We find some preliminary data, and we have to do more, that the kids who are dropping out are actually the leaders. So the ones that are dropping out are not getting the leadership opportunity. The culture isn't about collaboration. They're not pulled in, and there are a range of other issues. But why are their profiles the same? Why are we losing? So here we're losing the leaders in education. They're leaving, they're going into other sectors. We're pushing out the kids that are doing the culture is wrong. It cannot work. There's no data to support that. What I think lawyers can do, one of the concerns I have in dealing with searches is the open meeting law, which is the spirit, right? The spirit of the law is to give people a chance to be part of it. No closed door discussions do not match the governance and leadership models. If I was in a corporation, they could never function. I called up a corporate leader who advises the governor here because I was the chair of the Governor's Task Force on Innovation in Massachusetts. And I called him and I said, tell me about your best people in your company, because he's pushing accountability and get tough on teachers. And I asked him, tell me about your best leaders. He starts telling me. I said, tell me about their evaluations. Tell me about how they performed in their last evaluation. He said, I have no idea. I said, right. The reason you have no idea is because you motivate people. You bring in people and you push the motivation side and the incentives, not the evaluation has to do it. And he said, you just set me up. I said, absolutely. I set you up on purpose because we're pushing the wrong model. Do we need accountability? Don't you think we need accountability in education? Absolutely. Every organization has to have an accountability system. No change has ever come from pushing an accountability system. No corporation, no organization would ever have that as the lead for creating change. You change culture, you get the right leaders, you bring in all the wonderful things that people are talking about here. The best leaders know how to do it. What I was giving you the message to these principals yesterday is you actually know what to do, because their profiles in many cases are leaders. The culture drives this out of you. Now look at yourself and improve. It doesn't mean you're doing everything right. Take the pressure off yourself, learn, look at yourself, study your own behaviors, build